Hello and welcome to First Flight, a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch podcast where we are watching and discussing each episode of Enterprise in succession. First Flight is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
This is Commander Tucker of Enterprise. We've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Welcome, Enterprise fans. I am your co-host, Melanie.
And I'm your co-host, Abby.
And tonight we are discussing Fortunate Son, the 9th episode of Season 1. This episode was written by James Duff and directed by LeVar Burton. It aired on November 21st, 2001. But before we begin our discussion, we need to issue a read alert.
Tactical alert. All hands to stations.
There are potential spoilers ahead. We might end up talking about any part of the series at any time. We also want to give a trigger content warning as we will be discussing topics such as PTSD and coping with traumatic experiences. And now for a summary of the episode, it's time for Abby's Captain's Log. Okay, Abby, let's go.
Captain Starlog Supplemental.
All right, here's my Captain's Log for Fortunate Son. Enterprise must intervene when the leader of a human freighter, the Fortunate, sets out for revenge against Nausican pirates, which causes an ethical dilemma for Archer and the crew.
It's time to deploy our subspace transmitters and get into this episode. Abby, I'm curious what your impressions are of this episode.
Well, as everybody knows, I really like to talk about cold opens, and this one I liked because I enjoy that Enterprise does not always put the crew of the Enterprise in the cold opens. I mean, this is the second time in just a few weeks that we have seen a cold open that doesn't have any members of our crew. And I liked this one because it kind of set up that we were going to be looking at the boomers and we were going to be on a boomer ship and that there were going to be some really important guest stars in here. And it gives you a little bit of a feeling between the captain and the first officer of the boomer ship versus our captain and first officer and the contrast that there is there, but how they both have good and strong relationships. And that just kind of went right into our crew after the opening sequence where they were, looking at everybody and having all the experts, and Malcolm's doing his job about the weapons and Travis is filling in all the gaps about the boomer lifestyles. And that was just neat to see those two things paired right against each other at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've always been interested in more of Travis's backstory and learning more about the world of the freighter life. And we get a lot of great stuff here, hearing about Travis's childhood and him giving some backstory on what the ships are like and what the life is like there. And of course, we always want more of that. I know we both agree that Travis was pretty underutilized in Enterprise.
Yep.
So it's really nice to get a snippet here and get some more information from Travis. And I liked that cold open too, that football scene with the different gravity. That scene was really neat and interesting and kind of set a tone of life on a freighter ships.
And I really enjoy that both of these captains seem to have that easy kind of poking at each other relationship with the people that they're closest to, whether it's saying you couldn't throw that in Earth's gravity or the pranks that we know our crew play with each other or the good-natured ribbing. That's a crew that's a family. And that's such a good parallel between the two crews that we're going to see in this.
Good point. And we talked about T'Pol's barbs also, and we have another good one here.
Yep.
When she says about, can you tell us any more about the ship besides its recreational activities?
Yes.
Good line, T'Pol. And I also noticed one consistency thing here at the beginning, which I'm not critiquing, but I am pointing out that oftentimes series that run more than 2 or 3 seasons do run into some consistency issues because something happens in the first season. And then as the show goes on, they want to mold it and change it and kind of hope that we don't remember. And that's okay. But Travis does mention on this episode that he has a sister on his family's ship, the Horizon. And that's all he says. And later down the line in the series, when we see the episode Horizon, it's about Travis's brother serving on the ship. So I found that was interesting. I just noticed that.
That is interesting. And I had not noticed that in both of my rewatches. And now I bet you I'll notice every time. So thank you very much.
For sure. And I will just throw in one little chuckle here. I had a hard time separating this out and laughing, but the guy who plays Ryan's buddy on The Fortunate, I don't know if you're a Seinfeld fan, but he is the guy who is upset with George for double dipping the dip at a party. And for any Seinfeld fans out there, that's the same guy. I recognized him right off the bat. And I can't help think of that scene. I just can't help think of George Costanza. So just had to throw that out there.
Yep. Well, and I think something else that I thought was really neat to see in action is here's Phlox again. And he is a doctor. He's worked on so many species. He's been around more than the humans have. But as soon as he gets on to The Fortunate, what does he want to do? He wants to take care of that captain, and he won't let Ryan chase them off until he gets a look at the captain. And thank goodness, because he can fix the neural disruption from the Nausicaans weapon. And that's fantastic because as we see when this is bookended by scenes with the captain, he's very much needed on this ship.
Absolutely. I have to say, Abby, I have mixed feelings about this episode. There's parts about it that I really, really like and enjoy. I think it has a lot going for it. I think it is going to talk about this freighter lifestyle, which I find very interesting. There's a lot of potential here, and some of it is very, very good. There's other parts that I do have some issues with that didn't sit right with me. So this one was another kind of middle of the road one for me.
Yeah, I learned when I was doing research for this that this was the first episode that was completely filmed after 9/11. And
oh, wow.
I really think that this episode may have taken a different tone if it had been filmed even a month earlier. And I think a lot of people were so raw at that point that some of the actors, LeVar Burton, who directed, some of the lighting techs, they might have been a little more intense and dramatic and more traumatized than they realized. And that affected the tone of this episode. I mean, it is very obvious throughout the whole thing that Ryan and this crew are suffering from PTSD from Nausicaan attacks. And here was our country that had just suffered a terrible attack. So when I reframe my viewing with that, I understand some of it a little more, but I don't like it anymore. Some of the choices and the decisions and the moral gray area of this. So I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't know that. I'm sure it was extremely impactful for everyone involved in production at that time. And that's really, really tough. So here's what I'm kind of thinking about Ryan and the crew of The Fortunate. Even though this first officer, Ryan, is clearly making mistakes, he's taking on 3 Nausicaan ships. He's not thinking this through. And he's painted in the episode as an unsympathetic character, I think, in some ways. We're not supposed to really like him, per se. But I have to say, I really did empathize with him.
Me too.
And there is a greater question at hand that isn't actually answered in the episode. They never answer this question, which is, how do we protect our freighters? And Ryan does make some valid points. I mean, obviously taking prisoners and the violence and all that is completely unacceptable. They are really in a tough situation. They are being attacked by pirates. Even though we don't necessarily agree with everything he's doing, I think he has really valid points. And this is a deeper issue of the episode that I wish had been addressed more fully and more thoroughly.
I am seeing exactly where you're coming from with that. I feel like the writers might have intended for us to feel like Travis a little bit, understanding where Ryan is coming from, but at the same time, having those Starfleet ideals and being able to look at it from a different perspective and see both sides. And he chose to join Starfleet. So Travis kind of has made his loyalties known. And I think this really brings us to that scene between Ryan and Travis when they're eating. And first of all, I love watching the food on Enterprise, and holy cow, that was some really large pieces of meat. I hope T'Pol gets some really large piece of like veggie lasagna next time to compensate. I liked that scene, even though I think Ryan would have taken the food with him when he left. But I liked that scene because it was really natural how they started off with, friendly and talking about this and that, and then accidentally stumbling upon how Ryan's family had a very negative and fatal encounter with Nausicaans before, and then how it shifted from that pivot point to just openly hostile. So it's a very well-written scene.
I had a note similar to this. I really loved this scene. It was really well written and acted. And I agree with you. The way the tone shifts, they're having this pleasant conversation, joking around about the mystery meals, again, learning more backstory. And then it takes this tone where the elephant in the room is discussed, and we cut to the chase here when Ryan is like, why did you abandon your family? And I give Travis credit for standing up for himself. I mean, he's standing firm there and feeling really proud of what he does, of both lifestyles. He's proud of where he comes from, and he's proud of where he is now. And I really, really liked that scene a lot.
And I think it's interesting because it's paralleled again in the end, which we'll get to, when Travis helps talk him down. They have to have this scene. They have to have had all three parts of it, where they were just friendly and comfortable to when they got really personal to when they got hostile. Because if they hadn't done all of that, the ending would not have struck the same way that it did. It would not have worked to have Travis make that connection with him. So I really enjoyed both of those scenes and how Ryan and Travis were portrayed in them.
I completely agree. And that was a great ending scene there with Travis. And I liked the way that Archer acknowledged Travis at the end. At first, Travis speaks out of turn where he's not supposed to. And remember, Hoshi looks at him like, you're busted.
Yeah.
There's that little subtle look of, oops, even though Archer lets it slide, because Archer is relying on Travis to be the go-between here. But then when Travis does convince Ryan, that is a really well done scene. But I have to say again, when Ryan says this isn't about revenge, it's about protecting all freighters, and Travis is like, no, it's not. It's 100% about revenge. I don't know if I completely agree with that.
It's definitely a mix.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ryan does care about freighters in general. I mean, getting these codes from one Nausicaan ship probably isn't going to change huge things in the long run. Again, he's not kind of thinking outside his own experience, but I get where the guy's coming from.
Yeah. And Ryan is not unintelligent. You see, he's very smart. He's very quick. He comes up with some excellent plans. Like when he's in the ready room with T'Pol and Archer, and they're just like, oh, how are things? Are there only humans on your ship? And he quick comes up with, well, I think one of the kids has a pet. He's a smart guy. Getting them into the pod that he can then get off the ship, disattach from the ship, and shoot so it's depressurizing. Smart plan. I mean, at least to get rid of them. And so he's not unintelligent, and he's not unsympathetic, and he's not completely wrong. He's a very gray character.
Well put, Abby. I thought that some of his decisions were
impulsive,
which is understandable when you're under that kind of pressure. That was a really good description. He is a complex character.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the Travis and Archer scene together. First of all, while I get that the NX-01 is a pioneering ship and in some ways they are roughing it, they also have a chef. They have instant access to communications with Starfleet. So in some ways, compared to these cargo ships, they're practically like a luxury liner.
Sure is.
And that's why I wish that Archer had shown a bit more empathy throughout this. And regarding this scene, I wanted to say how very much I love and appreciate Archer's leadership style, his collaborative and warm style, the way he welcomes Travis in. Travis says, permission to speak freely, and Archer's like, of course, I want to hear what's on your mind. You grew up on these ships. I value your opinion. I've always really loved Archer's leadership style, where it's a safe place to talk. He cares about his people, and it's collaborative. Even though he makes the final decisions, he's very much a principle-centered leader, and I really love that. When Travis brings up these points of, are we handling the situation right? And Archer says, well, we have a code of behavior. This is how humans operate. We have to be ethical. I agree with what Archer's saying because, of course, we have a code of behavior and we do need to be ethical. I mean, I very much agree with that. No question. However, again, I do think this situation is just more complex than that. It's painted very simple in this scene where Travis is actually bringing up really valid points. And again, it's not being addressed in this episode of how do we deal with this issue that's going on with the cargo ships. You know, does anyone really care? And then Travis is like, okay, I get it, and leaves, and it's over. But I just found that to be a little bit simplistic. And while I agree with what Archer said, it is more complicated. And interestingly enough, later on down the line in the series, poor Archer, he ends up having to break this very code that he's talking about on several occasions. So
Yes.
that's interesting to think about. So I thought it was a really good scene, and I love the way it started. But at the end, I just wish it had been developed a little more fully.
Yeah, this chat reminded me of how T'Pol often talks to Archer and brings it all around and gets him to think about things in a different way and understand a different point. But I feel like Archer was real strong with this, and maybe that's what he was even trying to emulate because she's done that for him so many times. But he couldn't stick his landing. Like, he got most of the way there and then it just fell off. But he's growing and learning too. And yeah, we wouldn't have the Star Trek and the Prime Directive and all those things that we know and love if we didn't have Archer and the crew of the NX-01 out there making mistakes and seeing what happens when they do interfere and when they don't, and finding these gray areas and really pushing and seeing what happens with boots on the ground. So I hear people go, oh man, you know what? Janeway wouldn't have done this, or Sisko wouldn't have done this. Well, of course not. Because you know what? They have all this past experience to look at. These are the people laying the foundations for what will later become rules that they have seen time and time again should be the rules that we follow.
Excellent point. And I love the drama in this episode, and I like seeing them make mistakes. You're right. That is really important to Enterprise and the franchise. I only wish they had fleshed it out more, that they had explored a little bit more in this episode of, as I said, you know, how do we protect the freighters and how do we function in space as humans? Because I'm really curious, Abby, how these freighters work. Are they all under one agency? Do they have their own company, their separate groups?
Is there a guild?
Is there a guild? Because Travis said they have like little pop guns to protect themselves, right?
Yep.
Do they petition the government when there are issues about piracy? And obviously this is a 1 hour piece and we can't get into all of that, but it made me so curious about that.
This would have been a good episode to have as a two-parter, and it could have ended the end of part one with Ryan walking into the cargo bay and you see the Nausican there as the prisoner. And so they would have had all that first part of the episode to set it all up, and then the switch, and then the second episode, this is part two, could be about, oh, there's a Nausican there now. This isn't what we thought it was. It would have been a perfect time, but it was very early in the season still, and the series.
Sure.
Well, let's keep talking about Ryan for a second. Let's go to where he decided that he was going to go and find these Nausicaans and attack them. Now, obviously, he's pretty new at this whole hostage and torture and getting information stuff, because did he really think the guy was going to give him the right codes? I mean, would there not have been a way to verify this beforehand? Because everybody else seemed to be like, you sure? And he was full speed ahead. So, but what I liked here is I liked when he and Shaw, that was his coworker, when they were talking in the hallway, and Shaw was questioning Ryan and saying, you know, I'm not sure about this anymore. What's the point? But he did then follow him. And the scene that's when they come around that asteroid and whoops, it's a hub and there's a whole bunch of Nausicaan ships, which were beautiful, by the way. I just think it was interesting because you could see Ryan was just going to do this no matter what. He had set his course. It was too late to change his mind. Shaw was hesitant, but he was doing what his superior officer said. And then there's a woman just hanging out in the background who occasionally glances over her shoulder at them and keeps doing whatever she was doing. And it cracks me up every time because I'm like, well, she's not very concerned about the Nausicaans, is she? That's not the point. The point was that's when Travis's big speech comes in. And I think it was interesting if you watch the facial expressions on both Travis and Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
They are saying so much non-verbally, and they are both very good actors because you can see the change in each of them in how this interaction is going. And this is where it parallels right back to that scene in the mess hall. And I just have to say that both of those actors deserve kudos because that was very well done and very emotional. Even when this episode had you questioning, you felt that one.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. That is so true. The face acting there was amazing. Both fantastic. And the other thing I really liked at the end of this episode was when the captain of the Fortunate and Archer are talking together.
Yep.
And they're talking about how times are going to be changing. There's going to be a lot more ships out there. Things aren't going to be the way they used to be. No more good old days. Like big changes are happening.
Yep.
That was a really interesting point, and I'm glad it was touched on because it was very poignant for the freighter community and for everybody. That big change is happening here in the galaxy with this NX-01 ship. More ships are coming, like they kept saying in the episode, and I thought that was a really interesting and poignant part of the episode.
Yeah, that conversation was very well done, though I have to say that I wish Archer had stayed and had that drink. Because obviously the captain of the Fortunate wasn't just trying to get him drunk. He was looking for a chat. And I think he was looking for a chat with somebody else who's in charge of people and who has to sometimes make decisions where both of the choices are lousy options. And I think he just needed some of that, especially after he had made the choice to have Ryan as his first officer and then was disappointed in that choice. So it might have been nice for him to just have one more time where Archer turned around and went, you know what, just pour me a small one. And then, they could have clinked. And I think that would have been a nice way to end it and felt a little bit less preachy from Archer at the very end.
Abby, I completely agree. I thought it was, I'm not going to say rude, that's strong, but I was disappointed also that Archer didn't have the drink.
Even a symbolic one, like you said.
Guy, you're right. He was looking for company. He was looking for somebody he could relate to captain.
Yep.
And I know Archer had just been through a lot and felt like his ship was in danger and probably wanted to get the heck out of there. But Archer's a real people person. And I don't think it would have hurt him for 5 minutes to do that. I don't think one tiny little drink would have made him unfit for duty.
And if memory serves, I think there are a couple episodes coming up where Archer does drink on duty with some of his crew.
I think that would have been a nice bonding. And it felt a little dismissive the way Archer left. I see all sides of it. I really get all sides of it. But yes, that would have been nice. One final thought I had, Abby, was I think that Ryan definitely deserved consequences. No doubt. I mean, he took somebody prisoner. He stranded Archer and his crew in that floating piece of the ship. He went against his captain. He clearly deserved consequences. And I'm not excusing his behavior, but at the same time, I wonder if there might have been another way to keep his strengths as an asset to the crew. And that's just something I was kind of thinking about when I was watching it. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. He needed consequences, but I think more than that, he needed counseling.
Mm.
And I think most of them did. But since he was the one who instigated and was primarily responsible, I would have loved to have seen whatever the organization or the hierarchy is for the cargo ships to tell him, you know what, you're on pause. You're on a leave of absence. Take a sabbatical. Go get some counseling. Come back when you're done and we'll see how you're doing and how you feel about everything now. And then decide. Because he obviously was not in his right state of mind. I mean, not only was he suffering from the pirates, but he's lost his family. So the man needs some counseling.
Yeah, I agree. That is a very thoughtful idea. And I think your idea is very well taken. Well, we've arrived at Porthos's pick, which is our favorite part of the episode. Abby, I want to know, what's your favorite part?
Well, one of the things that just absolutely jumped out for me in this episode, and won't surprise anybody who's followed me on Twitter for a while, is I loved the costuming in this episode. The Nausicaan costumes, somebody knows how to do metalwork for those. They were beautiful. The jackets with all the rings and straps, fantastic. The hair and makeup, all great. But what really got me was the sweaters that they're wearing. And I think they were just that perfect blend of where you could see them being something that somebody might wear today with a little bit of a twist, like the buttons go down over your shoulder, or the cuffs are a little bit different, or the blend of the different types of thread. It's just really neat. And it looks like something you would wear on a freighter. They're, efficient, they're utilitarian, but they have a little bit, and they're warm because it's probably cold in space.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it's really interesting to see that. And that's something that has carried through to modern Star Trek. I mean, the knitwear in Discovery and Picard, beautiful. I'm really trying to start the hashtag Trek knitwear. It hasn't caught on yet, but I'm working for it. So the costumes in this episode absolutely get a Porthos from me. Not the most flashy, but really intricately detailed and gorgeous.
Abby, that is such an awesome pick. The costumes were amazing. And you know what? I want to see Trek knitwear out there as a hashtag. And I bet there'd be some Wesley stuff for that as well.
Oh, yes.
And when I was watching the episode, I had the same thought about the Nausicaans. I love those jackets. And there was something about the Nausicaan jackets with their hair that kind of reminded me of like 70s rockers. It just, that was super cool.
Yes.
My favorite part is probably the hide and seek scene with T'Pol. And I liked that for two reasons. First of all, as I mentioned, I really found the glimpse into the freighter lifestyle really interesting, and seeing the children on the freighter added to that to see what is life like for children on a cargo ship growing up like Travis did. And so seeing them playing games and things like that really grounded it. And I thought that was so interesting. And the thing I liked about this T'Pol scene was she was speaking the truth. Like she said, she was speaking the truth. So she was being very T'Pol. But it made me wonder, what did she know and not know? Did she know that she was playing along with the game and doing that other kid a favor? Or was she clearly just telling the truth and she didn't take it further than that in her mind? I couldn't help but wonder that, but I love that scene.
Oh, I could not agree more. That was my backup Porthos pick because it's just such a perfect character moment for T'Pol, who's a little bit more on the back burner this episode than she has been in the past few. So it was nice to have just that straight shot of one of her one-liners right there. And you're right, it could have gone either way, and maybe she did knowingly not ask, but it doesn't matter because it's an adorable scene.
Accessing library computer data.
Well, it's time to share some trivia about Fortunate Son. Abby, what can you tell us?
Well, this one I thought was really neat, and it takes a little bit of eagle eyes, but I know fans are good at that. So some of the cargo containers that were seen in Cargo Module 4 aboard the Fortunate, the one that got shoved off and depressurized, were originally real-life rolling composters obtained by one of the crew, and they were only slightly modified. And then they were originally used as the self-replicating mines in Star Trek DS9, but they were also as background containers in both Voyager and further episodes of Enterprise. So those have got to be the most popular rolling composters in the galaxy.
Whoa, I did not know that, Abby. That is super cool. And I'm sure with budgetary concerns, they had to do that with a lot of stuff. My trivia is that, well, first of all, this is the first on-screen appearance of the Nausicaans.
It is.
And I also wanted to mention, like you said about the composters being reused, that variations of the Nausicaan ship model used in this episode was later used as the Xindi insectoid patrol ship in season 3. I thought that was neat. I'm going to look for that. When we get to season 3, I'm going to take a close look at that because I didn't know that.
Agreed. Me either. People remind us if we forget that by season 3.
Gotta love those insectoids, Abby.
Transfer of data is complete.
Well, we've arrived at our Vulcan's verdict. On a scale of 1 to 10 grapplers, how do you rate this episode, Abby?
Well, like we said, there were some high points and there were some not so high points. And a lot of it I found fell into those shades of gray for my rating as well. And I liked that it filled in some of the holes in the stories for boomers, but it left me with more questions than answers. And it was just a little squicky for me when it came to the morality and the privilege and all of that. So I gave it a 5 out of 10 grapplers. How about you, Melanie?
That's exactly the same thing I was feeling. There's parts of it I really enjoyed, parts of it not as much, but it did leave a lot of questions. I did like that we did get a glimpse of the boomer lifestyle. So I also gave it a 5 out of 10 grapplers. And I have to say, Abby, this is the third week in a row that we matched grappler ratings.
And while I know that most likely in the future we'll have some differing feelings about the episodes and ratings, I did just notice that.
Well, you know what? That must be why it's so easy to talk with you, because we're secretly Star Trek brain twins.
My chronometer's running backwards, sir.
Incoming transmission.
You read my letter?
Well, now it's time for Daniel to send us back in the timeline so we can hear some of your picks. Abby, what do you have for us tonight?
All right. I have got 2 Porthos picks for us. One of them is going all the way back to our episode on Terra Nova. And this is our friend Ross, the Borg, T-E-H Borg, at Star Trek 1701, No Vowels. And he says, my Porthos picks is, I really liked the stylized language of the Novans, which referenced the cave living. Shale seemed to me to be a word meaning lies or deceits, but in tense moments, it was used more like the swear word bull. Couldn't agree with you more.
Definitely.
All right, and our second communication going backwards with Daniels was from Breaking the Ice. And this is from our friend Noelle at Noelle Read Alert at Coffee Null. And she said, my favorite part of the episode was when Enterprise drops out of warp so everyone can geek out over the comet. Archer even gives an announcement about it like a friendly airline pilot. I just love everyone's excitement over seeing new things in these early episodes. Beautifully put to both of our listeners. And thank you so much for sending these in.
I want to thank Ross and Noelle for those great Porthos picks. And yeah, we love to hear your ideas. So if you want to continue the discussion with us or send any of your thoughts in, you can reach us at First Flight Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And Abby, how about you? Where can you be reached?
Find me on Twitter at Abby M. Summer. That's SOMMER.
We want to thank you for spending this time with us. And we'll be back next time with Cold Front, the 10th episode of Season 1. And as always, we leave you with this quote from Captain Jonathan Archer.
The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.